Well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining our spring webinar today on emotional intelligence and leadership. Special thanks to the Hawaii section for sponsoring today's event. My name is Janita Pat, Hawaii section past president and your current district career guidance committee chair. Our moderator today will be Kathy Leong, but before I turn over the program to her, I'd like to pose a question to our panelists on a topic that has always puzzled me, being someone from Hawaii. And my question is, pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Thanks,
Kathy?
Jenny. Yep, thanks, Jenny. By the way, putting pineapple in things does not make it Hawaiian. Just an FYI from two girls from Hawaii. Yeah, it does not make it Hawaiian. Me personally, no, pineapple has no business being on pizza. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Kathy Leong. I'm a director at Wilson Okamoto Corporation in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am currently the Western District LAC Committee Chair, so I help with planning annual meetings, and I'm also the International Equity Committee Co-Chair. So we really appreciate you joining us today in our discussion about emotional intelligence. I'm going to do a quick go around quickly with our panelists today. We've got some great panelists and ask them to do a quick self-introduction as well as answer Jenny's question. I'm going to start with Roger Millar.
Hi, the answer to the question is no. I'm Roger Millar. I'm the Secretary of Transportation in Washington State. I am entering my 7th year as Secretary. In my spare time, I'm the Vice President of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. I'm the Board Chair of ITS America, and I am the Vice President of the ASCE Transportation and Development Institute. And I'm speaking to you from my house in the mountains where I'm on ski vacation this week. So,
thanks, Roger. Thanks for taking some time out to join us on your vacation. Next, we go to Sowmya Chandrasekhar.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Hi, everyone. My name is Sowmya Chandrasekhar. I work for Kimley Horn in their downtown Los Angeles office. I had about 14 years of experience in traffic and transportation engineering. I'm also actively involved in IT since 2014. I was a chair on the ID Southern California board, as well as I'm currently the second past president of the section. And to answer the question, I would say yes. If it goes with jalapenos, yes.
Thanks, Sowmya. Next to Robert Bertini.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. And I'm the head of the School of Civil and Construction Engineering here at Oregon State University, home of the reigning International Traffic Bowl champions. We have a fantastic student chapter here. I love pineapple, but my Italian grandfather was a chef, and I know he would roll over in his grave if we mentioned pineapple on pizza. So usually I keep the pineapple separate from the pizza. Kevin Karstens, was one of my students active in ITE, he introduced me to grilled pineapple. I'd never tried it before, and it's quite addictive, but not on a pizza.
Thanks, Rob. Next to Shilpa Mallem.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. My name is Shilpa Mallem, and I'm the Deputy Design Manager on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, which is a joint Oregon DOT and Washington DOT effort to replace the I-5 bridge over the Columbia River. I have also been involved with ITE since I was a graduate student, and I'm the current International Chair for Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm also attending the Leadership ITE class for this year. And here in Portland, I'm also part of the WTS board, and I'm the co-chair for the mentorship committee. So, and the answer, Jenny, is it's complicated. I'm kind of where Sowmya is. It totally depends on what else you have on the pizza.
Thanks, Shilpa. And then finally, Katherine Lee. What about you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Katherine, and I also go by Katie. I can say that I'm pretty involved in ITE. I've been involved ever since 2.5 years ago as secretary and then became president. So now this year I am the past president for Cal Poly SLO's student chapter. And then on the section level, I am involved as the current secretary treasurer for the Central California section. And then on the district level, I'm part of Jenny's committee for the career guidance committee. So that's super fun. And then I'm also a very, 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 very recent, as in like an hour ago, of graduating kind of officially from Cal Poly with a master's degree. Just defended my thesis earlier today. So that's a good big milestone for me. And I recently started my job at Caltrans District 6. So, and to answer the question, I gotta actually say it's complicated. I don't really mind pineapple, but it's not like I'm against pineapple either. Like I'll eat it, but it's not my go-to pizza.
So this seems to be a very controversial topic. I can see some of our, some people have been chiming in. I saw Nick Karcha put in the chat there that he had it last night, so he's definitely for it. I've got Mark Spencer texting me, telling me no pineapple and pizza. So I'm sure everybody's got a lot of opinions about this. Feel free to keep adding your thoughts about the subject, as well as our topic for today's webinar in the chat. We'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, your ideas and suggestions as we go through our discussion, and I'm sure everybody else that's attending would like to hear those too. So what is the topic of our webinar today? So the topic we have is emotional intelligence, and I have to say that it's something that I've become a lot more aware of in the last couple of years, but I think there's a lot of people out there that maybe just don't even realize what this means, but in a way that they don't know that it has a title. I think if you describe what emotional intelligence is, most people will agree with you that they've experienced it, they understand it, and it affects their lives. Katie was one of those. She said she didn't know there was a title for it. So, you know, the term first appeared actually in 1864, so it's been around for a while, but really it was popularized in 1995 in a book written by Daniel Goleman entitled Emotional Intelligence and Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And so it's not really that recent, but I definitely feel it's something that we haven't talked about a lot in our industry in particular. Emotional intelligence in his book was defined as being made up of 5 different components, and that's what the slide is you see on the screen here. So I just wanted to review them really quickly. These are sort of the components that we'll be discussing together with our panel as they share their stories, their experience in their professional careers. The first component is self-awareness, and self-awareness is the ability to identify your emotions and recognize how your emotions and actions can affect the people around you. The second component is self-regulation, and this is the ability to manage your emotions so that you can adapt to different situations. The third component is motivation, and that's the urge and desire that directs behavior toward a goal. The fourth component is empathy, and this is the ability to identify and understand the feelings of another person. And finally, the last component is social skills, and these are the tools used to communicate and interact with other people. So as we go through our discussion today, think about these 5 components and how they relate to the stories that our panelists are going to share with us today, and how they might relate to your experiences in your career, in your life, as you've dealt with emotional intelligence. And again, I want to stress that I'm sure that everybody out there has stories, they have thoughts, they have things they'd like to share. So please, we encourage you to use the chat to share these stories. We, as a panel, will also love to hear the things that you would like to share. But we want to spend the most time today kind of just talking and having our panelists just share some of the experiences of their encounter. I don't want to say necessarily encounters, but their experiences with emotional intelligence with people that were either had emotional intelligence or did not, and sort of use it as an example of maybe ways that you can handle it in your career. So I'm going to start off with Roger. Roger, would you like to share some thoughts or stories or ideas with us?
Well, I think back on my career and kind of the maturing of my perspective on the profession. As a young engineer, I was very, I wouldn't say arrogant, but very in tune with the fact that I was a civil engineer and you weren't, and what I've come to find from 40 plus years of public meetings is that when somebody stands up to the microphone and starts their talk with "I'm a civil engineer and," or "I'm a traffic engineer and," the next thing they say is usually awful. And it's really important as we think as professionals to be people first. So I don't lead with my credentials, and I don't assume that what I do is better because of my education, my training, and my certification. So, as a young engineer, I was very upset that they decided, okay, you finished designing your project, now you're going to go out and inspect construction. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm an engineer. Why am I out doing that? And what I learned doing construction, it made me a better designer. And then I had another experience a little later on. I was managing the arterials division at the city, and there was an important meeting on arterials that happened that I wasn't invited to. And I went to the chief planner and I said, well, why wasn't I at that meeting? Don't I manage the arterials division? And he said, oh, Roger, we engage the engineers after all the important decisions have been made. And I was like, oh, really? So I got into planning more and more. But I think what you need to learn, or what I've learned, is you don't have all the answers. Don't assume that you do. Be humble with how you approach your profession and your experiences, and engage people. If you don't do things with people, they assume that you're doing things to them. And if you get into that kind of a work experience, or that kind of an experience between your project team and the people that you believe in your heart of hearts you're seeking to help, you deserve the bad experience you get. So work with people, listen, lead with your heart and your passion, and keep all that credential stuff and the knowledge you have. It's a resource to you, but it's just one resource. So that would be a good place to stop.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks too for also helping to draw those direct correlations between emotional intelligence and leadership, which is also one of the focus points of this webinar, as well as why it's important. It really is important to being a good leader. Thanks for starting us out with that. And I saw Rob was nodding his head quite a bit. So why don't we go to you next, Rob?
Well, thank you. And yeah, Roger is someone I think many of us aspire to be more like. And I sometimes feel like when I have had limited opportunities to meet Roger in person, I kind of want to be your friend is how I word it, So I meet people, when you meet great people, you want to like hang out with them more. So you're definitely in that category for me. I have thought, I guess, in my life, I always thought that work was work, right? And that you kept your emotions out of work. And so for many, many years, I tried to do that and almost would feel embarrassed if I kind of let my awareness of my emotions or other people's emotions come into the workplace. I felt like that was maybe a sign of weakness even. And I can remember very early in my career, I was communicating with a contractor. I worked for a county, and I needed to get somebody to inspect a sewer connection. And it was in a residential area, but the contractor kept backfilling the trench before our inspector could get there. So like the third time, so I would go out in the field and try to facilitate and make sure that our inspector would get there. And it was a very deep trench. So it was, to them, it was not zero cost. And I can remember talking to the contractor like the third time and my lips were quivering. I was so angry, and like I was ready to explode. I didn't, but I remember this feeling that I was so, my emotions were about to get the best of me. I can remember that moment, but I think most of the time I would suppress them. Fast forward quite a few years, I moved to Washington, D.C. to lead a large agency within the Department of Transportation, 1,200 employees. I was a professor, so I didn't really have any people reporting to me other than students, right? So I had 1,200 employees, plus about 10 people, direct senior executives who reported to me directly, who I had to quote unquote manage. And a number of them needed big time interventions at the time. And so I remember someone giving me a book called Difficult Conversations. And I remember quickly reading that. And another book I read was called Your First 90 Days in Government, which addressed some of the same issues, that you needed to get right in there and not be afraid. You need to empathize with people. And so I really found it to be a very good fit once I realized that it's okay to confront highly emotional situations right away, not to wait. We had things happen, 1,200 people. There were very sad things, very happy things that happened, and very hard things, but they all you had to be present as your whole person, not just the engineer in you, or not just the manager or the leader, but the human. And so I found that's how it was like a very quick lesson, that the whole person, emotions included, should be at the table and should be available in this kind of environment.
Thanks, Rob, for sharing that. Shilpa, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Kathy. I think along the similar lines of what Rob was saying about, I'm like you, I did not really become aware of this word maybe until a couple of years ago. But when you start thinking about it, okay, this is what it is. So if you go back, think about it, either your career or your life, you realize it's part of us. So I started thinking when I first came out of school and started working, I had two amazing managers. It was Ray Harbison and Joe Wutker. They had retired from the Delaware DOT as the chief engineer and chief of planning. And I was fresh out of school, but I never felt that I couldn't ask a question. I couldn't approach them with anything at all, whether it be technical or non-technical. In fact, I still go to them even to this day when I have to make decisions, because so without using the words emotional intelligence or mentorship, I was lucky enough to get that before I understood those topics or what they mean. And then I started thinking back a little more, even to school, elementary school, middle school, high school, with some of the teachers. I don't know about you, but maybe some of you can relate how sometimes you just like the subject because you like the teacher, you enjoyed the class. And conversely, I'll admit it, there were probably some classes I skipped just because you didn't like the teacher. And so that's how much influence you have as a leader, as a teacher, on the surroundings. And keeping the technical aside, like Rob mentioned, yeah, everybody's technically capable, but it's how you project that and how you feel people welcome is a big part of people even wanting to be in that space. So that led me to also think that these people I saw, like when I came out of school, I saw these managers, I'm like, oh, I want to be like them. I want to be that kind of manager. I want to be that kind of professional. At the same time, I'm sure we also have experiences in other places where great technical capabilities, maybe the product might be great, but you wouldn't look at a person and say, I want to be that person. That has nothing to do with the degrees. So I think it all comes down to how you feel and how you make people around you feel, like if you just come down to bare bones of it. And there's this one quote that I've been coming across in different books, and we also came across it in Leadership IT. It's a quote by Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, which says, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we are feeling creatures that think. So the traditional way of keep your emotions out of your work, keep your emotions out of logic, that's not really feasible. And I guess even from a gender standpoint, when it comes to women, we're outright labeled as emotional, which is kind of seen as a negative. And I guess conversely, like Robert, like you said, like for men, we ask them to suppress their emotions because it's not good to be that. So hopefully, I'm really glad we're having this discussion, because it's the first time I'm having this discussion like in IT or in a professional sense. So I hope we have more of these discussions, because it's everything. Projects are projects. They're technical. If they're simple, they're easy, everybody would be doing that. It's the project environment, it's the people. But it comes down to sometimes the project in our profession, it might just get halted, it might change, you might go into another project, but when you look back and say, oh, I would definitely, okay, the project didn't go that great maybe, but I'll definitely work with that team again. Or conversely, you might have a great project and say, yeah, but I really don't want to go through that again with that person, a team, a group of people. And so, yeah, it's going to affect your profession in a big way. So
Thanks for
I'm going to
sharing
stop there.
Yeah, Shilpa, thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, that reminded me of when we were doing our initial meetings before this webinar. Actually, Roger said something that really stuck to me when we were having our preliminary discussions. And he said that emotional intelligence is the difference between a technician and a professional. And I think that it was a great comment you made, Roger. It really stuck with me. It really resonated with me, but it's sort of in the same line of what Shilpa just said. You know, a lot of us have the technical skills, but it's those other skills that make the difference between a leader, somebody that can definitely lead both their teams as well as within an organization like ITE, instead of just doing the work. Let's go to Sowmya.
All right, thank you, Kathy. I was just like being the audience here, listening to all these great like stories and thoughts. But yeah, I am actually really thankful that Western District, like, you guys have deviated from the technical topics, which are like drilled down on us, and like try to bring up a topic which should be talked about more. So when I mentioned it during our office staff meeting, I did get comments like, oh, that is an unusual topic for ITE. So kudos to you on that, for sure. And I actually have very similar experience to what Shilpa was mentioning about, the technical side. And that is something that I wanted to share as well. Because when I was a fresh graduate, starting my first job, I thought, okay, how would I become successful? I will become successful if I know what the manuals are, if I know what is in the manuals, get all that PE, all the credential, like Roger was telling about, like, do not lead with your credential. And when you're a fresh graduate, that's all you talk about, because that is something, it is not, I would not say it's a very unique case, it's coming out of nowhere, because that is what right from our elementary school is built into us. What are your scores? What are your grades? Everywhere you go, people ask you, what are your grades? What are your scores? Nobody asks about anything which goes beyond the score and grades. So I think I'm thankful at this point that we are talking it in our profession, but I feel like this is something that we should start like talking about, which educators say for even in elementary schools, right? So, but that said, like talking from my own experience, so when as I was saying, when I first started working, I was like, okay, I know what the MUTCD about, I know what the HCM is about, that's awesome. I'm going to kind of like solve as much as possible, get my P, get my PTOE, get my T, whatever I can get, right? But then there was a point where I still thought that, oh, I'm looking at my leaders here, who I totally revere, but it's not that they know all the stuff in their manuals. It's not that they have answer to every technical question that is posed to them. But what is setting them apart, right? So that is what kind of like got me thinking first. And I'm, as mentioned before, I'm kind of like really glad that it has a term to it, which is emotional intelligence. And that is when I kind of like started thinking a little bit more, how can I get there, right? Because the thing is that with the with the whole, even in his book, he says that it is a little bit, David Coleman actually says that it is a little bit more than IQ. Emotional intelligence should always have a little bit more than IQ, because if you look at the scores, say like, you know, everybody would get like say 4.0, but what would differentiate the various candidates who have 4.0 is that emotional intelligence. Who is going to be able to work with your team better? Who is going to grow in your team better? That emotional intelligence is that metric which will set them apart. So so that's what the whole point. And I'm not saying that I have conquered it. I know what I'm talking, and that's when I'll make a shameless plug for Leadership IT, because that is making me think about all these aspects which I've always wanted to think about. It's streamlining my thoughts in the right direction in terms of like, okay, think about self-awareness, think about self-management, you know, what your triggers are. You can go and read books about emotional intelligence, or you can just take Leadership IT course. So that is what I'm doing. And so that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Sowmya. We had talked a little bit before this webinar about how Sowmya and Shilpa are both in Leadership ITE, and yes, this is actually one of the topics they explore. So it's a great program if you ever want to explore that program as well. I'm going to go over to Katie. Katie.
Cool, thank you. So as Kathy mentioned before, if she didn't mention emotional intelligence, to be honest, I wouldn't even have noticed that everything that I've honestly been going through ever since I've been into leadership in terms of being a student chapter officer. I really didn't even know that everything had a label to it. And like the things that goes into my brain a lot throughout the whole entire process actually has a label to it. And it just like, I never really realized how big emotional intelligence actually plays into my life until I actually sat down, read about it, did some research, and I sit down and I said, wow, you know, being a leader in ITE really made me think a certain way. And I really think that the 5 components of emotional intelligence really tie together the way it really has made me more successful in a way. So I kind of want to talk about more about like how it had made me become a better leader in terms of identifying my emotional intelligence. So at first I want to say that like self-awareness and self-regulation. So I'm always constantly meeting new people, and obviously you don't have to be a leader in order to meet people on a daily basis and interact with people. But it made me realize that if I were to talk to people, and obviously you're going to get into conflicts once in a while, maybe a lot more than usual, maybe, you know, it comes in waves, right? And it really made me realize, okay, if somebody is anxious or stressed out, overwhelmed, and they're spilling out their emotions, I've learned to not replicate that emotion to them, even though if I feel the same way as them, because 1, it adds fuel to the fire, and 2, it emotionally and mentally drains me, right? So it's also for me to also learn to how to regulate myself. And also in terms of like, being a leader is to really find a different motivation points, because there's going to be its highs and its low. And it obviously, I'm kind of referring back to being a leader because that's when I kind of met all of these different components at its peak. But being a normal person as well, like during your daily lives, right? There are many different things that can motivate you, whether that be stress, whether that be negative motivation to pick up your slack and to move forward, or those happy, like good motivation, as in like, I am actually self-confident in myself and I know that I can do this and I can move forward with it. So like there are different motivations that I have learned that really helped me become a better leader. And then last but not least is like empathy, which kind of moves forward, like goes hand in hand with like dealing with conflict. I feel like that's when I really use it a lot, is to always listen to the other side and to understand where they're coming from or where their ideas are coming from. Because obviously, people might think that their ideas are better, but then you think that yours is like better than theirs. But at the same time, you should really listen, and because there's never a straight path, right? And you never know, you can merge those 2 ideas and make a better picture than you can ever imagine. So that's where I kind of learned to really empathize when I worked as a team, as being president or just being part of leadership. And then last but not least is social skills. I was kind of forced, since ITE president, I was kind of forced to talk to people and to actually interact. I mean, that's not necessarily my thing. Personally, I'm more of an observant type. I'm not really the type to like reach out to you. I'm more of the one to kind of sit in the back and kind of look around, and I'm like, okay, if I'm comfortable, then I'll talk to you. But honestly, having this social skill, I feel like this is like the lowest. If you were to score my emotional intelligence on like 5 components, this is probably going to be my lowest. It's like, if I have a choice to reach out to you, I may just struggle a little bit on my own before I reach out to you. Unless I know that you have the resources, I feel like I'm going to constantly come to you. Right, Kathy?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's just like what I have experienced in terms of like being a leader and emotional intelligence.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to let everybody that's in the audience know if you guys have questions for our panelists. You can definitely use the Q&A box. It should be in the bottom of your screen. I did get a question that was sent in via text instead of the Q&A box, but I will ask the question of our panelists. Katie, there was a question that came in that asks, do you look for emotional intelligence in your mentors and as well as in your career opportunities? As she mentioned earlier, she's a recent graduate, and as you look for mentors and people to guide you, are these things that you think are very important in the role models that you're going to pick and the mentors you're going to pick in the place that you decide to actually work for the rest of your career?
Yes, because I feel like those things really play a huge role, because I've learned to identify them, and I've learned that this is what I want. And obviously, people aren't going to be the perfect person that I imagine them to be. And obviously, this is where EI kind of kicks back in to really adapt. Although EI is like a huge part of who they are, and that's where I feel like it's really cool and interesting, because EI really makes up somebody's personality. And honestly, somebody with like similar EI, I want to say similar experiences, I can relate more to them. So in terms of mentorship, it would be great. It would be a plus, but I also don't mind having a mentor that doesn't really, because it kind of forces me to look at things in a different perspective. So yes and no.
Thanks, Katie. Actually, you made a good point. We talk about the fact that there's these 5 different components, and I will openly admit I am good at some of them, but I'm not good at all of them. And it's a constant struggle even for myself. Part of self-awareness, though, is knowing where my weaknesses are, although I'm pretty sure Jenny could share my weaknesses with you as well. For me, I find that motivation is one of the ones that is a really key component of emotional intelligence for me in particular, trying to figure out how I motivate myself, how the people I speak to are motivated. So Roger, of the components that were shared as being part of emotional intelligence, in your opinion, what were the ones that speak to you the most? Where do you think your strengths lie?
Oh my, I guess my strengths, I have a sense of my strengths and my weaknesses, and I have an ear for and an eye for where other people are coming from. That's hugely important. When I am managing a project or managing an agency, it's about bringing people together to get to success. It's not about my success. So that's hugely important. As a person who has worked for a living, since I was 13, I guess, I have always made a point of picking my boss. For any young professional, coming into look to your boss. It's not your agency. As an owner, when I'm looking at hiring a firm, I'm looking at the management team. The reputation of the firm, great, fine. Who's leading the team? What have they done? And how are they at doing what they do? So when I went to work for the city, I went to work for specific individuals, and I've made that my point all the way through my career, is working for people that I can learn something from. But remember, when you have an advisory group or a public meeting or an online forum or whatever, that's not an opportunity for you to show everybody how wonderful you are. It's an opportunity to learn from the folks who have taken the time and the energy to be there instead of at home with their kids or watching the ball game or whatever. They've come to be a part of your thing. The ones who are angry, and it's going to happen in your life, they're angry because they care. And so you have to be respectful of that. And I think just that awareness of yourself and the ability to read other people are the two things that have been most important to me in my practice.
Thanks, Roger. Randy said super good points, and I definitely agree. I'm going to go to Sowmya next. Sowmya is a past president of the Southern California section for the Western District, which I'm pretty sure everybody knows is one of the largest sections in all of ITE, I'm pretty sure, with close to 900 members. So Sowmya, in your experiences as a leader of your section, can you share with us how emotional intelligence has maybe helped or hurt in your experiences managing such a large number of our ITE members?
Thanks, Kathy. Actually, that is something I have reflected ever since you invited me to be on this panel, because I was like going back to my years being on the board. I would definitely say if I had given more thought to emotional intelligence, I would have probably been like, in a much better position than I was. Because the thing is that there were like some aspects, I think there are some aspects that I'm still working on. One of it definitely is like, being aware of other people's emotions. Because sometimes what happens is that when you have a task in hand, especially we all know doing volunteering work, how little time we have in which we want to accomplish so much. And that is always a challenge. So when relaying the information, like requesting information from others or trying to get a particular, getting people to do a particular task, I think practicing a little bit of empathy, knowing that they have a lot of going on in their background. And at this point, I'm being very vulnerable about this whole thing, because this is something that I feel a little bit tweaks here and there could have actually really helped me, like, 100-fold, So that is something that I definitely would say, reflecting back, that is kind of like one core idea that I should have probably explored more. But it was not like all downhill. It was like, of course, a lot of meetings. We used to have meetings every single month. We'll finish one meeting and get on to another meeting, like, like planning for the next meeting. So it was like back to back to back. And I don't even know how my years flew with IT SoCal, but it was very enjoyable. My peers on the board made it really easy, actually, to hold that position while juggling family, while juggling work. So I'm really thankful for all the board members that I, shared the stage with. But going back to like the self-awareness aspect, I think that is the first step towards emotional intelligence. I would always say that, because unless you become self-aware of what probably like, what areas you need to work on, what are your areas which are like your strengths and the ones which are weakness, you would not be able to help others, or you would not be able to I would not say you would not be able to be successful, but more successful is how I would say it. But yeah, so, and one other thing I wanted to add real quickly, Roger made a point about like public input and all, and as engineers we deal with that every single day, and all those thoughts are really great actually to hear. And this, I have seen projects make it or fail because of that aspect. If you're able to relay, if you're able to come down to the level that all the people who are like in that meeting are, and able to relay that information, I feel like it can be make it or break it. It can just make that difference. So thank you so much for all the insight, Roger. I'm actually learning a lot from this meeting too.
Well, that's what we hope. I would have loved to have this be like every member of the district in a roundtable discussion, because I'm sure everybody has stories to share and a little tidbits of wisdom. I'm actually going to go to a question that came in from Marshall Elizer. He says, how does the transition to working in a more virtual future world influence how a person applies and uses emotional intelligence? And I'm going to go to Shilpa for this one.
Thanks, Kathy. We're just talking about how it is definitely a little more tricky because you don't always have the visual cues, or you can't always see what the body language is or how a person is feeling, especially when with the click of a button, you can switch off the camera. It's tough if they switch off the camera because they agree and have nothing to say, or disagree and don't want to engage anymore. So it's definitely gotten more tricky. But a couple of things that I've noticed in meetings that help people be involved and be inclusive is, they're small things, but I think they make all the difference, is noticing when hands go up, and then we have the hands up, raising the hands feature in meetings, just noticing that, because there have been sometimes when they don't get noticed and people have a hand raised and then just they go away. And at some meetings, I really admired people even keeping an eye out on who was unmuting. So they're trying to say something. One thing I know, I'm sure all of us are struggling, is people talking over each other. So I think if you're facilitating a meeting, it's very important to allow that space and keep an eye out, or like some might be reluctant, or maybe they have something to say. So you might have to call them out, but at that time, it's also assuming that you know the person, you're not just calling somebody out to make them feel uncomfortable. So I think that's with the meeting standpoint, but general management standpoint, I think now it's more than before. I felt the necessity of like blocking out time on the calendar to just have check-ins with either your supervisor or your direct reports, to make sure you have that time, because with the virtual meeting, it's very easy to go back-to-back meetings and not talk to each other, other than if it's for a project. You can always cancel those, but yeah, definitely need to adapt for those kind of situations. But I think there are ways of doing it. You just can't say, okay, somebody's feeling, the thing we don't know is like somebody's really feeling down. If you're in the office, you see that, say, let's go for a coffee, talk it out. That's something is tough to figure out in the virtual sessions. But hopefully, if you have that trust set up with your team, with the people that you're working with, they will reach out to each other in the team or to you if something is bothering or something is off, so you can have that conversation. So it does come all the way down to like trust. Do you trust your supervisor to have your back? Do you trust your supervisor to give you the necessary tools? And also the main thing Katie mentioned was empathy. It all comes down to those few aspects. So those don't go away. It's just how we apply them, how we adjust and apply them in a virtual environment.
I agree. I've been saying this a lot recently, is that words matter. I think in this age where we're a little bit more in the virtual world, we've been defaulting a little bit more to written communication, but not all of us are the best communicators in the written format. And so sometimes those things about word choice really make a difference when it comes to emotional intelligence, understanding how people are perceiving you, how you are perceived. I think there's an additional step now that we're in a lot more virtual world that maybe we need to think about a little bit better, because I think nowadays more than anything else, I think word choice is a big issue.
Absolutely, and we're all burnt out, like in Zoom, like having these conversations too. So I understand you're adding another meeting, but if you don't need it, you don't have to. But that's been something that really helped me out, is just having that time and saying, it doesn't have to be technical, let's just chat.
So Rob used your suggestion. He raised his hand. So Rob.
Sorry.
Yeah, just reflecting on Marshall's question and this discussion with it, that one of my mentors early in my career, his name was Scotty Bruce, and he had this MBWA, management by walking around, and you get to know people. And I worked in a very large office it was a light rail design project, and he would he got to know everybody, but he would come and there would be this sort of buzz around him as he would move around the building. And I had an experience recently where someone, I could say probably still is, very unhappy with me and involved shouting on, not by me, but by the other person. And part of it, I think, was there were some things that I wanted to talk to this person about, or even to inform them of, or just to tell them. But because every conversation has to be set up with a calendar invitation now, it made that, and I didn't really want to make it that formal. I wanted it to be more like a, hey, I'm just dropping by, I wanted to mention this or that. And those kinds of things are really important to me, the unofficial, informal means of listening and communicating an important point in this case. And so I think many misunderstandings ensue when every interaction has to be structured and formally created. So that's made it additionally challenging, I think.
Roger's got his hand up. Roger.
Yeah, I think the technology, we've always had this, and we've had this technology for quite a while. I was managing my executive team in a room in our headquarters building that I haven't been in for a couple of years now. And then it had great big cameras and screens and the rest of that. The tech was the easy part. It was using the tech that was the problem. And then all of a sudden we had no choice. And so we're using this stuff. And just like managing by walking around, you can do that. We use Teams, and if I go on Teams, I can see all the meetings that are going on, and I can just pop in, turn my camera off. Eventually they realize I'm there, but hey, I'm just listening, no problem. That makes people nervous sometimes, and sometimes it leads to interactions that are great. But the fact that you're using technology as opposed to being face-to-face doesn't change how you interact with people and how people will interact with you if we're using the technology wisely. I'm more concerned as a manager about a hybrid environment. We as an agency are starting to go back to our offices, but we've set a goal that 40% of our people will be teleworking at any given time. And there are a couple reasons that we set that goal. The foremost one being that if everybody on our team that can telework, almost, I wouldn't say without exception, 75% of them want to telework 3 or more days a week going into the future. That's their preferred way of doing business. So if I, as secretary, said everybody back to the office, I would have a lot of vacancies to fill because people would find opportunities to work elsewhere. So with half of my team not able to telework, that means that the people who can are going to be away from the office 60 to 80% of the time. So like us right now, we're all, depending on how you have your screen set up, either I'm looking at the speaker or I'm looking at, kind of the Hollywood squares, which I just dated myself with that. Or there's probably some other show that is more appropriate, and then you put half of the team around a conference table at the office, and the cameras. I've been in a couple of hybrid meetings, and you can see the faces of everybody in the room. You can see the faces of people that are on Zoom or on Teams, but the people who are on Zoom or on Teams are seeing a widescreen shot of little tiny people around the table, and that's a terrible way to interact. So I think we have to become more adept at the technology, but remember that the social skills, the speaking, the interacting, the mentoring, the managing, the being managed, that didn't change. It's just the distance, and we have to be better at using the tech, knowing what we know about how we need to interact as people.
Thanks, Roger. Wanted to just say that we've got some great comments in the chat. So if you have an opportunity to take a look at the chat, Nick shared that they've been trying to focus meetings less not on work products now, but more on personal, to make sure that you still have that interaction. And then Randy's added a few thoughts about hybrid and the virtual world as well. So I encourage you to take a look at the chat. Before I go to Katie, we are getting closer to the top of the hour. So I just wanted to ask each of our panelists as we go around to maybe give 1 or 2 tips or suggestions of ways that you might improve your emotional intelligence. Katie, I'd like you to share your thoughts as well as answer the question I just posed.
So in terms of like, I just feel like for me, it's easier for me to identify which one's my weakness. And like I mentioned before, it was more in the social skills. And I want to put in the input that all of these skills can be improved. So don't think that once you hit the highest point, you're done. Like you're not. There's always room for improvement. And so for me, it's always just being able to just reach out whenever I want to and don't be shy, you know, stop being as observant and try to take initiation, especially if I have a good idea. Maybe I should be the one to initiate something instead of listening to other people first before like initiating, right? So that's like one of the things that I potentially am going to work on in the future. And then I was going to talk and say, I was looking at Marshall's question again about you know, the virtual world, basically. And it's kind of interesting going into a job already in a virtual environment. And I was just thinking of that question, like, this is very interesting. Like, I can kind of relate to this in a certain way. And how that actually applies to all components, it actually applies to every single one of them. Because for me, you know, when I was president and like going to all these meetings, they were all virtual. So I tend to just overpack my schedule and do back to back to back to back, and eventually lead from, you know, morning all the way to even 10 p.m. meetings. And obviously I can't do that now because I have a set schedule now, thankfully. So I can really only limit myself from 7:30 to like 4:15. But it kind of gets people to be like, oh, okay, well, since I'm in front of my computer all day, then I can just load up my meetings because that's just, you know, it's convenient. And, you know, it's the only way to really interact with like my clients or just my teammates, right? But then like loading everything up in terms of meeting can really deplete your self-awareness and self-regulation, because then you get really tired. And then after that, you lose motivation. And then now you don't want to talk to anybody anymore. So every single component, once one fails and you overdo it, I feel like it all fluctuates. So I feel like going into the virtual world, I found out, you know, in a work experience is just to make sure that you realize that you personally need time for yourself. And that's within the workforce and outside in the personal life. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks for sharing that, Katie. That's a great tip, actually. Let's go to Sowmya.
Right, thanks, Katie. I have been like thinking about this a little bit too. I think for many of us, I would say this does not come naturally, to have this emotional intelligence, to actually be like, you know, because if you even look around, there are only a few leaders who really stand out, right? It's not that everybody stands out in their own way. Let me correct that. But like, you know, really, they are the ones who are like really outshine others. And so that's what came as the first realization to me, is that this is not a natural trait for me. So this is what I need to do. And this is something I've been doing. It's kind of like repeating it, being very intentional about it. What am I saying? What am I doing? How am I reacting? Reflecting back to it. And if there is something that I was able to implement, like in terms of like, you know, showing empathy or like understanding what other people are going through, I'm like, okay, I did it today. Can I do this again when the same situation comes about? Because what also happens is that it also matters like what frame of mind you are in that particular at that particular time, because the way you react is completely dependent on what actually happened before it. So even for this meeting, I actually took like 5 minutes. I have been running back-to-back meetings. I took like 5 minutes to reflect back, saying that, okay, so what am I going to take to the meeting today, right? You know, who's going to be the audience? Who am I talking with, right? So I'm kind of like making all my thoughts like a little bit more intentional. So that is definitely one thing that could help people. And the other thing I am also trying to do is being a little bit more observant about things around me. Like, for instance, if I see leaders around me who I truly aspire to be, like, I kind of like try to identify what character trait or what emotional intelligence do they bring to the table that sets them apart, that makes me want to be like them. So those are the things that I'm kind of like working on. So I don't know. So in case of like tips, this is what my tip would be, to kind of like be very intentional in what you're doing.
Thanks, Sowmya. So we're slowly coming in at the top of the hour. So I'm gonna go to Roger next, as being somebody that Rob indicated is somebody he'd like to be a friend with. So it's definitely somebody that Sowmya would find she wants to aspire to be. So Roger, do you have anything that you'd like to share with our audience as far as tips or suggestions of how to improve your emotional intelligence?
Well, I was thinking of three things. One is recognize that you're a part of the most people-centered engineering profession you can have. You're not a chemical engineer, you're not a computer scientist, you're a civil engineer, and everybody on the planet is an expert in your space. So you've got to be a people-oriented person. The second thing I would encourage you to do is let that line between your work and your life is your life. Your work is a part of it, but blur that line, because you are a professional in a community. You are also a member of that community, and you know what you can bring to that game, but let everybody in the community bring their piece to that game too, and be a part of that community. And the third thing is something one of my first bosses, one of my first mentors said is, don't just do something, stand there. You know, when you're presented with a crisis, when you're presented with a hot issue, don't just do something. We're inclined to go solve the problem. Now, you know, if there's a truck running at you, yeah, jump out of the way. But it is better to stop, think, collect your thoughts, and then act, as opposed to just feeling you got to do something. Because no, you don't. You got to have a better sense of what it is you're doing something about before you go forward.
Thanks a lot, Roger. I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny.
Thank you. Really great discussion today. I just wanted to say a special thank you to our guests, our panelists, Roger, Sowmya, Robert, Shilpa, Katherine, as well as Kathy for moderating the event today. Special thanks also to the Hawaii section for sponsoring our event, our webinar today, and all of you for attending. And just as an announcement, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to sign up for our district annual meeting at Palm Springs, which will be held between June 26th to 29th. Registration is open, so please sign up and book your hotel rooms today, and look forward to seeing you all there. We have a few more minutes, so we can actually stick around for more discussions, right, Kathy? Sorry, I think you're muted. Did I?
You know, 2 years of virtual meetings, and that mute button gets me every single time. So thanks again to everybody for joining us. We just would like to catch the last thoughts from Rob and Shilpa before we close out. So Rob?
Oh, mostly I was just going to share that in a few years ago at the Student Leadership Summit at Cal Poly Pomona, I was asked to be on a panel, and I thought, oh, I'll just show up, I'll be on the panel. And then as I was sitting there, the other panelists had prepared these elaborate presentations and very structured, gifted kinds of ways of communicating. And so I was sitting there as they were talking, I made this list of 10 things that I would advise to students. So it's now my top 10 list. But of course, I'm around students quite a bit, but also I have a large team of employees, probably about 75 people here now, not 1,200, but I do often say some of the same things, like it's the people, the people matter. And so like Roger said about choosing your boss. And then I sometimes tell students, we teach the different manuals in our profession, tend to maybe limit our creativity in some ways. But of course you need to know them if you want to pass the PE exam and stuff like that. But I try to tell stories to the students about people I know who have written the manuals. The Highway Capacity Committee, they write the Highway Capacity Manual. I know people who wrote the Highway Safety Manual. So I try to say, yes, know the manual and how it exists in its current form, but be part of the solution in the future to make it better. Or maybe in some cases, we don't need, we want to be more creative, and maybe we have better tools, so we don't need to limit ourselves so much. And we write. So Sowmya, I want you to write the next manual, right? And so to create the future that we want to create, right? Because we want to have a hand in making the future safer and more inclusive and so on. So I think it's up to our students and to all of you also to create that future proactively.
Thanks, Rob. And then finally to Shilpa.
Sure. Mine was along the lines of what I said before, and also what Sowmya said is, for me, when I look at these leaders and without knowing like the terms of emotional intelligence and thinking, I want to be like them. So I'm sure we all have people we looked up to that way. So there are characteristics that you can watch and learn, but also maybe reach out and see if they would have a chat with you or be a mentor. So chances are maybe it comes naturally to them, but there's also a chance that they probably had to learn all those characteristics based on their experience, and you might get something away from it about how they handle a particular situation and how they got to that point. And the other one I wanted to mention was self-awareness. The first one, it's not just about our self-awareness, it's also what we project that affects other people's self-awareness. For example, and like I'll take my example to me coming in as a fresh student out of school, just my manager saying, yes, you can do this, or this is your responsibility, changes your self-awareness and your confidence about, even if it's like a bigger task, just that trust and the trust that you can go to them to get things done changes your self-awareness, your confidence, and your ability to do things. So it goes both ways. That part of self-awareness. So just keep in mind, I guess, two sides of coin for each of those aspects we talked about on EI.
Thank you very much. Thanks again to all our panelists for participating, and we really appreciated everything you shared today. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Here.
Bye.